Well, for example, war is our #1 business. And we devote more time, more money, more laboratory space, more genius in the natural sciences to war than anything else that's done in this country. In the bloody 20th century, over 200 million people have been killed in war. Our country has killed a disproportionate number. From World War I through World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Yugoslavia. We have on our hands weather modification as, quote, a force multiplier. The Air Force swears that it will, quote, own the weather by 2025. Own it. Control it at will. And we have this lovely installation on the the northern oil slopes of Alaska called H.A.A.R.P, High Frequency Active Auroral Research Project, which uses the gas from that very rich oil deposit, the natural gas, to power an enormous generator which beams electromagnetic pulse into the ionosphere, and which the scientists claim can act as an ABM shield, can act as a weather modifier, can act as a counterinsurgency measure anywhere on Earth. I hope that some of you have read as to what electromagnetic beams can do to any of us in our physical, emotional, and spiritual makeup. Last December, they had an odd snowstorm in Phoenix, Arizona on December 7th, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. And I suppose there was some significance attached to that. But a violent snowstorm hit the area, a very, very rare thing. And there was no wind. And furthermore, the snow was falling horizontally with no wind. And a very, very thoughtful guy, said something extremely wrong and evil and distorted is happening here. And he took his four-wheeled vehicle and he climbed a neighboring peak, and he looked down and the snowstorm was swirling all the way around the peak, a couple of thousand feet down, and up there it was calm and sunny and utterly beautiful. And it was a H.A.A.R.P experiment. So we'll own the weather by 2025.
Here about H.A.A.R.P, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. Several of you at the table have a little bit of a piece here. As you know, this is located up in Alaska, currently funded by the Air Force Research Lab. It was formerly funded by the Office of Naval Research. One of the prime customers is DARPA, which is currently doing experiments at the facilities. So we'd like to start with you, Dr. I understand that a lot of folks here on the committee probably don't understand what H.A.A.R.P is.
Senator McCaskey, as I think you know, one of our programs has been engaging for facility and I understand that we did get value out of that interaction. The P in DARPA is projects, and we're not in the business of doing the same thing forever. So very naturally, as we conclude that work, we're going to move on to other topics. So it's not an ongoing need for DARPA, despite the fact that we had actually gotten some good value out of that infrastructure in the past.
Senator, the Air Force has got a great deal of H.A.A.R.P in the past. We took over from the Navy and managed it and actually did a number of experiment campaigns. Have finished our work that we were actually doing up there, moving on to other ways of managing the ionosphere, which the H.A.A.R.P is really designed to do, is to inject energy into the ionosphere, be able to control it. And that work has been done. The Air Force has maintained the site for other government agencies to use for several years now. And with DARPA completing their project, that's our last government customer that we have on the site.
Exactly is solar geoengineering?
A set of proposed technologies to rapidly cool the Earth by reflecting sunlight back into space.
The idea is based on the cooling effect of volcanic eruptions. When Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines erupted in 1991, it spewed 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide into the sky. That reflected so much sunlight, global temperatures dropped by an entire degree the following year.
So one notion is that we could mimic those volcanic eruptions by sending specially equipped airplanes into the stratosphere to do exactly the same thing.
The U.S. government is now flying high-altitude planes through the stratosphere to study what sun-blocking gases may already be there. Microsoft founder Bill Gates backed a major project at Harvard using balloons to deploy aerosols, but tests were put on hold after some pushback. And while it may seem far-fetched, a recent United Nations report seriously considers using giant space mirrors to deflect sunlight, while other scientists propose mining moon dust and launching it at the sun. At the Palo Alto Research Center in Silicon Valley, this white tent is a makeshift lab for experiments with something called marine cloud brightening.
This will generate the plume that will contain the aerosols.
It injects salt water into clouds over the ocean.
The idea is you'll make the clouds a little brighter and that will reflect more sunlight back up into the atmosphere.
Exactly, that's the idea.
Those effects could be beneficial or they could be negative.
Kelly Wanzer runs Silver Linings, an organization advocating for research into climate interventions like cloud brightening. But she says we need to quickly curb our planet-warming fossil fuel emissions because dimming the sun isn't a long-term solution. It's a sign of desperation.
This would not be the first choice.
No, or third or fourth choice. You have to compare it to overloading the system with warming and the environmental system starting to break down, which is where we're sitting on the edge of.
This is something that might provide some cooling and buy us some time to rapidly shift away from fossil fuels.
That's right. But there are a lot of things that we don't know. How does the climate system respond if you do that over a long period of time?
If it all sounds like science fiction, well, it was.
18 years I've hated the train.
The 2013 film Snowpiercer depicted geoengineering gone awry, turning the planet into a dystopian snow globe and confining humanity to a high-speed train. Climate scientists are divided on geoengineering. In dueling public letters, one side calls for accelerated research, while the other wants it banned, warning the possible deployment of solar geoengineering by individual nations would be frightening and inequitable.
Bill Gates is backing the first high-altitude experiment of one radical climate change solution, creating a massive chemical cloud that could cool the Earth. It's called solar geoengineering, and it's highly controversial.
How long will it be that countries keep experiencing these climate impacts before someone gets desperate and says, hey, we need to cool the planet with solar geoengineering?
It would look something like this. Thousands of planes would fly very high and use nozzles to inject millions of tons of light-reflecting particles into the stratosphere. It would create a thin chemical cloud of those particles around the whole planet, blocking some sunlight from reaching the surface. It would mimic a giant volcanic eruption, which we know cools the Earth, but it also comes with significant risks and uncertainties.
Things like mass famine, mass flooding, drought, of kinds that will affect very large populations.
It could weaken monsoons in India, China, and Africa enough to affect crops. It could eradicate blue sky.
You start increasing the amount of diffuse light and you have less direct light, which is the same thing as saying it looks hazy and white.
medijski izvještaj iz Bosne i Hercegovine, a to i iz susjedne države Europske unije, o toj nekakvoj bavarogiji Sahare, nekakav opasan saharski pijesak. A onda u tim izvještajima obrazlaže se zbog čega bi mogao biti opasan. Pa to sad ovi razni meteorolozi istražuju i kažu da su tu vrlo visoke površinske koncentracije čestica PM10, mjestimice većim od 250 mikrograma po kubičnom metru, što je više od preporučeno 24 sata i praga od 50 mikrograma, dakle 5 puta više. I to je to što je opasno. Da li mislite da je ovo opasno? Da li ima još nečega u saharskom pijesku koji je nešto učestao u posljednje vrijeme? Vjetrovi pušu, ciklone su tu redovne i anticiklone. Da u brojnim medijima se prezentiraju raznorazne teorije otkud taj pijesak, otkud i Sahare, šta se nosi sa sobom, ali je činjenica, evo pogledajte, automobili, bar na njima se najbolje pokazuje, su izrazito prljavi. Ali ljudi pitaju i šta je sa zagađenjem tla. Naravno, radi hrane, šta je s nama, da li to nas zagađuje? Šta smo radili? Odlučili smo uraditi prvu komparativnu analizu pravog saharskog pijeska, dakle onog iz Sahare, i ovoga što pada po Bosni i Hercegovini, u Bosni i Hercegovini, po nama, po automobilima, po tlu, pa i po cijeloj Europi. Cilj analize je bio utvrditi da li je prašina nakon padavina pravi saharski pijesak, kakav je hemijski sastav te prašine, prljave kiše, to kako neki zovu čak i blata. I da li se u prašini nakon padavina nalaze elementi koji bi mogli biti toksični, štetni za kompletan ekosistem, uključujući dakle i nas. Tamo pišu da su te PM10 čestice, pa i 5 puta više ima nego što bi trebalo da bude u toku jednog dana, a ovdje aluminij, arsen, bor, barijum, berilijum, bizmut, kadmijum, kobalt, hrom, bakar, željezo, litijum, mangan, molibden, nikl, olovo, antimon, selen, kalaj, stronci, talijum, vanadijum, cink. Ima i srebra. Razliku smo utvrdili i definisali u skladu sa jedinim koji imamo, pravilnikom o utvrđivanju količine štetnih i opasnih tvari u zemljištu, Službene novine Federacije Bosne i Hercegovine 72/09. Evo, arsen u saharskom pijesku, njega je manje od 0,50 mg po kilogramu. A u saharijskoj kiši 22 mg po kilogramu. 44 puta više. Nije to malo. Tamo drama za one PM10, ako ih je 5 puta više, ovo je 44 puta više. E sad one magnetne osobine što ljudi snimaju po videima pa prezentiraju na YouTubeu, Facebooku. Željeza je u saharskom pijesku 1811 mg po kilogramu u Sahari. A u saharskom pijesku, ili kiši koja je padala kod nas, 42.270 mg po kilogramu. 23 puta više. Sve ti mangan, recimo, 19,2 mg po kilogramu je u Sahari, kod nas 1339. I to je nešto polijepo. Bakra ima 1,2 mg u Sahari, kod nas 39,6. A i cink u Sahari 10,43, kod nas 671 mg po kilogramu. I ono što smo sada prezentirali, dakle, prezentirali smo pravilnik o utvrđivanju količine štetnih i opasnih tvari u zemljištu. Još jednom ću. U saharskom pravom pijesku aluminija ima 14,2 miligrama po kilogramu. U nas, u ovoj našoj kiši, 10.342 miligrama po kilogramu, što je oko 728 puta više. Puno aluminija. U smislu da javnost bude ne samo Bosne i Hercegovine, nego cijele regije i šire adekvatno obavještena, jer dužni smo to, odnosno dužni su to uraditi u cilju zaštite životne okoline i svih nas.
E oggi abbiamo con noi Roberto Nuzzo, buonasera.
Buonasera, grazie per l'invito.
Allora, parliamo di un argomento, Roberto, davvero molto importante, quello di questa sera, perché ci sono alcune pubblicazioni apparse su riviste scientifiche prestigiose che hanno rivelato che sono in corso dei preparativi per oscurare il Sole attraverso appunto l'attività di geoingegneria. I rolando aerosol dovrebbero essere appunto espletate nell'ambito della segretezza per le quali sono già stati fatti i conti relativi ai costi per cercare appunto di oscurare il Sole sino al 2100.
Sì, buonasera, è una notizia che abbiamo preso dalla H.A.A.R.P Science, che è una pubblicazione scientifica di tutto rispetto degli Stati Uniti, redatta dal professor White Smith, che è un professore docente universitario della Yale University. Questo documento presenta i costi diretti stimati di un programma di iniezione di aerosol stratosferico SCIE, Stratospheric Aerosol Injection, con lo scopo di raffreddare il clima attraverso l'irrorazione di un composto di solfati in aerosol H2S04, il codice. Si stanno costruendo degli aerei appositi cisterna di nuova concezione per andare ad alta quota a un'altitudine di 25 km, poiché quelli esistenti arrivano massimo a 13-14 km, si fermano in troposfera. Dunque il tipo di velivolo di nuova generazione sembra essere un progetto solo di esclusiva costruzione statunitense, poiché non si registra alcun consorzio per la sua costruzione. Il tipo di aereo è il SAIL, Stratospheric Aerosol Injection Lofter. La denominazione è SAIR, SAIR 01, che è il velivolo, e poi c'è il dirigibile SARA 01, SARA 01. La lunghezza di questo velivolo è di 46 metri, la larghezza di 55 metri e quindi un'area alare di 250 metri, è mastodontico. Sarà una flotta iniziale di 100 velivoli, prodotta in 10 anni, in grado di trasportare appunto il carico di 25 tonnellate di aerosol. Ognuno dovrà svolgere 400 voli all'anno, quindi più di un volo al giorno, 4 ore di attività in aree di operazioni. A bordo avrà 2 piloti, un addetto all'operazione e un laureato di fisica e chimica. È un programma che a loro dire sarebbe poco costoso, perché si aggirerebbe attorno ai 18 miliardi di dollari all'anno per ogni grado Celsius risparmiato. Tutto questo però ha un tallone d'Achille e difficilmente potrà essere un segreto, per cui si pongono proprio la questione della segretezza. Questo aspetto è rilevabile al punto 6 del rapporto, che io invito tutti a leggere e che metteremo come PDF in allegato a questa intervista, perché ognuno deve informarsi per la gravità dei fatti. È un documento che consta di 40 pagine con specchietti e descrizioni. Quindi dicevo, una flotta seppur iniziale di solo 8 velivoli per il primo anno appositamente costruiti sarebbe comunque un'attività molto intensa. E qualsiasi operazione del genere dovrebbe avere il coordinamento tra diversi paesi, sia nell'emisfero settentrionale che meridionale, che vanificherebbe ulteriormente la prospettiva che tutto questo resti un segreto. Dozzine di grandi aerei che effettuano molte migliaia di voli all'anno da più basi in diversi paesi renderebbero facilmente rilevabile questo programma, quindi parlano proprio di segretezza. Si deve pensare pertanto a una base aerea su un'unica isola equatoriale nel mezzo del Pacifico per eludere ogni rilevamento, ma questo comporterebbe maggiori costi per le distanze da coprire. Pertanto si inizierà dai poli, Polo Nord e Polo Sud, dallo spazio aereo e dallo spazio aereo dei paesi consenzienti. Perché vogliono irrorare a 25 km d'altezza nella troposfera? Perché la stratosfera, che parte da 17 km, dove non c'è nessun movimento di aria in termini di verticalità, ma solo in termini orizzontali, e tali venti vanno con velocità dai 200 km e più, i quali sono sempre costanti. Con questi venti qualsiasi cosa che dovesse raggiungere la stratosfera verrebbe diffusa su tutto il pianeta. Ecco, io spero di aver dato un'informazione agli italiani e spero che questa intervista possa essere diffusa e divulgata, perché è documentata, perché stiamo dicendo delle cose importantissime. Questo rapporto è del 2018, che è stato aggiornato nel 2022 con aggiornamenti di gennaio, marzo e settembre 2022, dove chiedono l'accelerazione dell'applicazione di questo piano.
Ecco, quello che ci ha comunicato Roberto è davvero molto importante, un po' inquietante. A margine le chiedo così brevemente come sta andando poi la petizione sulla geoingegneria.
Guardi, intanto devo portare i ringraziamenti da tutti gli italiani a Telecolor e anche a Coordinamento Piemonte, anche a 9MQ, che hanno sposato come voi questa causa. C'è molto interessamento, molte richieste, dato che il tempo è lungo, il tempo scadrà il 1° di novembre la raccolta delle firme. So per certezza che gli italiani si stanno adoperando in tutti i modi, ci sono molte richieste, molte domande, dubbi che vogliono, hanno bisogno di chiarimenti che noi stiamo dando, ma c'è molto fermento.
Grazie a lei Roberto Nuzzo per essere stato con noi, a presto.
Nel gennaio 2002 Bush e l'allora presidente del Consiglio Berlusconi hanno firmato un accordo dal titolo Cooperazione Italia-USA su scienza e tecnologia dei cambiamenti climatici. L'obiettivo ufficiale è quello di finanziare progetti di ricerca nel campo delle energie alternative. In realtà nelle linee guida si parla di esperimenti di manipolazione degli ecosistemi terrestri che permettano di esporre la vegetazione a condizioni ambientali simili a quelle attese in scenari di cambiamento globale. Si parla di verifiche in campo di ipotesi sviluppate nell'ambito di esperimenti di laboratorio e si programma lo studio dell'interazione tra aerosol e nubi. Il documento spiega come si intenda sperimentare le condizioni di temperatura, precipitazioni e concentrazione di anidride carbonica nell'atmosfera alle quali andremo incontro nei prossimi 100 anni per verificarne subito gli effetti sull'ecosistema e sulla vegetazione.
Various chemicals to produce rain. China was just doing this over the summer in Beijing to make sure that there weren't any wasn't any rain during the Olympics. But all this has changed dramatically with the U.S. military's secretive research and plans to control the planet's natural weather. This has not been given very much press. And we have to remember that we have a corporate-owned press where 85% of radio, television, and print media is owned by 5 corporations. So they're not going to talk about things that are of really serious consequence. And that's somewhat of a blessing, a mixed blessing of the internet, but there's certainly plenty of information on weather modification. The Air Force is on record as saying, quote, they want to control the weather by 2025, and we are not talking about just seeding the clouds for rain. Weather modification means, quote, any activity performed with the intention of producing artificial changes in the composition, behavior, or dynamics of the atmosphere, unquote. And as of April this year, there are more than 150 different weather modification programs around the world. Since about 2000, the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy have been spraying the entire United States sky with a toxic brew of chemicals and other biologic agents. Just want to show you something. We have 2 different kinds of trails in the sky right now. One are called contrails. How many of you know what contrails are? Contrails would have been around from the ends of planes since World War II. These are very, very short exhaust trails that usually evaporate within a few minutes. You just look up at the sky and you'll just see a jet, sometimes with 4 trails, but it evaporates pretty quickly. How many of you know what chemtrails are? Nobody. The military and some commercial planes are spraying us with what are called chemtrails. I want you to look at the, and oftentimes before there's a weather front, there are heavy assaults from these planes just before a weather front is changed and comes in. Military and some commercial jets have been fitted with huge barrels of at least 49 different kinds of documented chemical poisons. Among other documented ingredients in this toxic man-made clouds are pathogenic molds, fungi, weaponized viruses, and made in some places like the secret site at Fort Detrick, Maryland, which is supposed to be a cancer site, but there are a number of scholars and professors tracking this that have big questions about this. Barium and nanoalumin particles. What do these do to the human body? Barium is an alkaline earth mineral. It was discovered in 1774. At low doses, it can act as a muscle stimulant. At high doses, it detrimentally affects the heart and the nervous system. Barium is toxic to all mammals, and that means not just humans. Aluminum, which is the most abundant metal in the Earth's crust, is known to diminish kidney function and destroy brain cells and cognitive function. Just think about it. Just between the aluminum and the mercury that we're breathing all the time, we've got already a serious issue about brain function and cognitive function. There is also documented evidence that the aluminum in chemtrails is released as nanoparticles, and that when they reach the Earth environment for wildlife, in lakes and streams, it's causing serious problems with wildlife there. Researchers are also finding that nanoparticles interfere with the growth of plants. Nanotechnology is totally unregulated. Just this past month, a new research report came out showing and documenting for the first time that these nanoparticles actually go through the skin. Well, if you breathe them, whether they go through the skin or whether you're inhaling them, it's still a problem, a serious problem.
Okay, so I kind of want to expose some chemtrail truth here. As most of you know, we're selling the plane, so we're not getting paid out anymore. This plane has been certified to use the chemtrail fluid DK5812. And so it holds 50 gallons in each tank here, and then the fuel goes in this one. And then right in the exhaust, just right up here, there's a injector that sprays the fluid when you turn on the switch. And the switch, it won't spray fluid unless the engine's running because it's like real toxic chemicals. So it needs to make sure like you're in the air. We get paid about $10 a gallon to spray the stuff. And this has a government issued retrofit kit. And you can see down here, they installed this switch. As you can see, it says chemtrails. You just turn it on and then you just collect money. That's how it works.
The foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
My name is Paul Hellyer, and I'm a former Minister of National Defence for Canada. The subject we are discussing today is chemtrails, H.A.A.R.P, and an ionized sky. There is something fascinating about talking about a very serious problem that most people are totally unaware of. I am talking about chemtrails, H.A.A.R.P, and an ionized sky. Usually when I ask people what they know about chemtrails, I get a blank stare. Sometimes, occasionally, someone will have seen a streak in the sky, but have written it off as a contrail. The white water vapor streak emanating from a jet engine at high altitude. That is not what we were talking about. Chemtrails and contrails are as different as night and day. Contrails, as far as we know, are harmless. Chemtrails, on the other hand, are loaded with nanoparticles of aluminum, barium, strontium, and heaven knows what else. The bottom line is that the U.S. military has been poisoning the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soil where we grow our food, all without our knowledge or consent. We have been suffering from chemtrails for a long time. Medical experts say that they result in a number of diseases, from heart attacks to Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's disease. All of these have decimated our health care and increased the costs by millions or trillions of dollars. And it appears to be worldwide, because it's possible that all of the major powers have been involved. In addition, chemtrails, in cooperation with H.A.A.R.P, are part of a geoengineering system that can produce snow in summer, rain in winter, or cause artificial earthquakes, all to be used as weapons. Covert global climate engineering programs are the single most environmentally destructive assault the human race has ever unleashed against nature and the entire web of life. The list of catastrophic environmental and human health consequences directly connected to the ongoing climate engineering insanity makes these programs mathematically the greatest and most immediate threat we collectively face, short of nuclear cataclysm.
Jean Manning is a journalist who stumbled into a strange world when she started asking questions about alternative energy sources and heard the story of an early 20th century inventor named Nikola Tesla.
Tesla is almost a cult hero and an overlooked genius, and he has so many inventions that are at the basis of technologies that we have today.
She went to a conference on Tesla and had a close encounter with a mysterious scientific researcher who became her deep throat, her Mr. X.
He sent me a file of materials about the Bernard Eastlund patent.
About a month ago, the U.S. Patent Office granted a patent to a Houston-based scientist, Dr. Bernard Eastlund, for an invention which, Dr. Eastlund says, could be used to change the weather. Dr. Eastlund says the invention could also be used to disrupt communications all over the world and might be used to destroy or deflect a missile attack.
The Eastlund patents had the ring of the mad scientist aspect of Tesla. Tesla talked about this Tesla shield around the planet and talked about particle beam weaponry, something called a death ray.
Death ray? Jean wasn't sure where all this was leading until Mr. X called again.
And he said, the maniacs are actually going to do it up in Alaska.
Mr. X's maniacs were in the U.S. Pentagon, and he was convinced they were conspiring to build Bernard Eastland's Sky Zapper under the guise of a nice little research project deep in the Alaskan bush called H.A.A.R.P.
The basic concept is to build a very large antenna, then to utilize a large amount of power and to beam those radio waves up into the upper atmosphere.
Have you approached the Pentagon with this invention?
Yes, and what I'm not at liberty to tell you is the details of what that interaction has been.
The word spread through the Alaskan bush, and soon a band of suspicious Alaskans set out to warn people about what they saw as the U.S. military's secret agenda.
And what you have with H.A.A.R.P is sort of the universal hammer for geophysical warfare.
Nick Begich is the chief conspiracy theorist.
So when did you know that you were onto something?
I think as soon as I saw the references to Tesla's work, and when I read Bernard Eastland's original patents, I realized that what we really had here in Alaska was a prototype for a ground-based Star Wars weapon system.
H.A.A.R.P is a non-classified project run not by Bernard Eastland, but by the U.S. Army and Navy. The official H.A.A.R.P story is told by one man, John Heckscher.
It consists of several types of transmitting instruments and numerous scientific instruments that study the natural ionosphere and the ionosphere that has been perturbed by the instruments that we are building.
The ionosphere is a sea of electrically charged particles in the upper atmosphere, and the instrument is a powerful radio wave transmitter.
Does it have any military applications?
The site itself is strictly a scientific research site. Perhaps the outcome of some of the science, perhaps some of the results could be applied in to military systems.
Just a little physics project? Jim Roderick isn't buying it. He's been gunning for the real goods on H.A.A.R.P, and his weapon is the internet.
The military is incapable of doing pure science. Science is conducted by them for application in weapon systems, for no other reasons.
From his shack in the middle of an Alaskan village, Jim and his co-conspirators around the globe have been tapping into databases. They've dredged up hundreds of long-buried scientific reports and even some internal documents from the military. They call it the world's first techno-protest, and they did it all on the military's own baby, the net.
Plans for H.A.A.R.P activities correlate with projections of what can be done in the Eastland patents. It's that simple.
So it's not a coincidence?
It's not a coincidence.
Well, I hate to disagree with you, but it's not his patent that we're building. Superficially, yes, they send energy up into the ionosphere, but the Eastland patents require huge, prodigious, in fact, amounts of power, like 100 billion watts.
Remember that number, 100 billion watts. You'll hear it again later.
H.A.A.R.P requires only 3 million watts.
There is a paper trail leading us back to Eastland.
No, there is not. There is no paper trail that I'm aware of that's leading back to Eastland. Eastland used to be an employee of the company which is building H.A.A.R.P, but that's pure coincidence.
Is it also a coincidence that the tiny company that owned Eastland's patents was later swallowed up by an enormous military intelligence firm called E-Systems?
$2.1 billion in annual sales, 1.8 billion of that, with a B, was to military intelligence groups, CIA, NSA, and others. And of that, 800 million were black projects, so secret that even the United States Congress didn't know what they were.
E-Systems was then swallowed up by Raytheon Corporation. It too specializes in super secret contracts with the Pentagon.
Why would Raytheon be so excited about this? Well, it's a ground-based Star Wars weapon prototype. For them, it represents potentially billions and billions of dollars.
So how would you describe this world of E-Systems and Raytheon and H.A.A.R.P?
Dark.
There's a lot of people around here that have a really lot of strange ideas, and I think many of them are pretty bizarre.
Michelle Angbritson keeps the H.A.A.R.P computers from freezing up in between visits from the military scientists.
Do you know, do you understand what they're doing here when the scientists come in?
You mean when the scientists come in and shoot the beams up? Yeah, they're shooting the beams up, and I think that heats a little small space in the ionosphere, and then you've got guys that are sitting on computers, and you've got people putting up weather poles that measure weather and everything like that. I mean, there's something spooky going on here.
There have been claims made by some scientists that that you could heat up the ionosphere and affect local weather.
If you were to do Eastland patents, I have no doubt that's the case.
Claims are being made that it could disrupt global communications.
Global?
Yes,
No.
that it could shut down another country's communication system and enhance your own.
Not H.A.R.P. Not H.A.R.P. in
As it is
Alaska.
now.
No.
But you couldn't disable any systems?
Those that use, if the systems used a path which was accessible to the H.A.R.P. beam, yes.
Starting to sound like Eastland's invention to you? Well, remember, John Heckscher says H.A.R.P has nowhere near the power levels Eastland talked about.
It seems like this entire thing has been a matter of disinformation.
Eric Nashlin understands the military. He spent 15 years in the service as a radio engineer. He knows deception.
It came to our attention that there was a document, a technical memorandum, I think it was 195 or something like that. And reading right in the front of it, they said that, bottom line, although this is here, it does not constitute publication.
It doesn't exist.
It basically doesn't exist, so it was kind of like, wow, here's the document that doesn't exist. We're talking several hundred pages of document that, you know, doesn't exist on a project that is completely unclassified and open to the public.
We got it through friendly folks in the right spots, but it really lays out, these are notes from a conference that really break down where they were going to use this technology and how this technology was going to be applied.
Remember the 100 billion watts debate? Well, for Nick Begich, this document was pay dirt.
And in the document that we uncovered, the actual desired level of these researchers is 100 billion watts, and there we're talking something closer to the order of what Bernard Eastland envisioned.
You must be familiar with Technical Memorandum 195, which talks about a desired level of 100 billion watts.
Which memorandum?
Technical Memorandum 195.
I'm not familiar with that number.
Well, it's about 600 pages. And it's, I mean, you may not acknowledge it because it hasn't been published, but it exists. I've seen it.
I don't know what Technical Memorandum 195 is, because I haven't seen it.
This is a published document. It's non-released. And it's the word games that John Heckscher plays and the word games the United States military plays, and it's the word games they continue to play, and those are the things that need to end.
Zap incoming missiles, disrupt global communications, and engineer the weather. And ready? There's one more. Some people believe the technology being tested here could be used for sinister projects involving humans. Radio waves messing around with people's brain waves. And guess what? The military denies this one, too.
The human mind is subject to being affected by radio frequency energy, and that's what this device is.
In other words, you can move the moods of large populations using this kind of technology.
So now we have not just maniacs in the Pentagon, but a bunch of Dr. Strangeloves? Pretty weird stuff. But scientists have been experimenting with radio frequencies on animals' brains for decades. And the military has followed it all very closely, especially once it found out the Russians were onto it.
It was all kept a deep, dark secret by the two superpowers.
Back in the 60s, the Soviets began zapping the American embassy in Moscow with a low-frequency beam. No one knows for sure what they were up to, but one theory is that they were trying to mess with people's central nervous systems. And one report did say the diplomats got depressed a lot. And hey, just think of all the nifty applications against the enemy. Why blow people up when you can drive them crazy?
From documents dating back into the early 80s, we see that the military had discussed the possibilities of mind control through radio frequency energy. The possibility is there. The military has studied it.
A 1982 Air Force report called radio frequency energy a major new research initiative and said that RF can, quote, disrupt normal purposeful behavior. A 1987 military report called for more research on RF energy as a non-lethal weapon, while pointing out that most of the existing technology is classified. And sure enough, in 1993, there was a big conference at Johns Hopkins University. Here, the entire conference was classified. But the agenda wasn't, and weapons using extremely low radio frequencies, or ELFs, were listed as a very attractive option.
Is it just a coincidence that there's been all of this talk and that H.A.A.R.P will be experimenting with this? Is that all just coincidence?
I believe the ability of ELF to affect the mind is a side issue for us. It may be real. I can't say.
It's been exceedingly difficult to find information on what is supposed to be a major new initiative of the military. All we see is H.A.A.R.P.
Well, then I'm being kept in the dark, if that's the case.
The question is, you know, could they, would they? And we believe they can, and we believe they will. Somewhere, at some point, all of this technology merges at some level within the Pentagon, and it happens to be in Alaska, and it happens to be now.
It isn't just conspiracy theorists who are concerned about H.A.A.R.P. In January of 1999, the European Union called the project of global concern and passed a resolution calling for more information on its health and environmental risks. Despite those concerns, officials at H.A.A.R.P. insist the project is nothing more sinister than a radio science research facility.
Cielo, guarda in alto e se trovi un cielo me lo comunichi, dici guarda. Il cielo non esiste, ragazzi. Non so da voi, siamo a Napoli, quartiere fuori rotta, il cielo non esiste più. È una roba pallida e grigia, però è tutto normale, vero?